Story Church today. Thank you for joining us online. If you're watching with us, if you're joining us right now, click the share button on our YouTube page. Let people know wherever you're watching from that you're watching with us. Share on your social media platforms. Send a message to your friends. We want to share the message of what we're doing and connect with everybody and with as many people as possible. So if you're tuning in, let other people know. We want to connect with as many people as possible. And I'm just really pumped for today. If I've never met you before, my name is Scott Lackey. I'm the lead pastor here at New Story Church, and we are just so grateful. We are so thankful that no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, that you have decided to spend time here with us this morning, that you said, I'm going to be here with New Story Church online. We are so grateful to have you here with us today. And before I jump into the message today, I want to share with you something really exciting that's happening right now in the life of our church. For about a month now, we've been going through something called the season of giving. And we've been stretching our generosity a little bit, and we've been working towards a goal of raising $20,000. And we're raising these funds so that we can continue to further the mission of New Story Church, so that people can continue to discover the new story that Jesus has for their lives. And we're looking to give away 10% of what we bring in during this time. 5% of it is going to go to 8 Days of Hope, and the other 5% is going to go to a local partners of ours called Kenton Closet. And we've been working towards this goal of $20,000. Today is our very last day of the season of giving, and we are currently at $16,000. We have raised $16,000 for the season of giving, and today is, we can celebrate that. Today's our last day. If you want to give online, you can give at newstorybuffalo.com, and there's a giving link there, newstorybuffalo.com. And if you're like, I want to send a check, we will still collect a few days after today as checks come in the mail. You can send a check to New Story Church to 3200 Elmwood Avenue. That's 3200 Elmwood Avenue, Tonawanda, New York, 14217. Join us in the season of giving. We're just $4,000 away from our goal, and I'm just so pumped. For those of you who've given already, thank you. For those of you who are praying about giving, thank you for even praying about it and considering it. And this is just a really exciting time. It's a really exciting season for our church. And season of giving. It's great. So we're going to jump into the message today. And what's funny is I was initially going to start a new series today called Christmas Classics, and we're actually going to start that series next week. What we decided for this week was my buddy Nick got me this sweater that says Giant Slayer on it, this hoodie, Giant Slayer, and it's got David and Goliath. And I thought, what better way to end our Face It series than with David and Goliath? I don't know about you guys, but I've been loving this series. And I thought we should add an extra week to Face It. If you've missed the past few weeks, you can check out the messages on our YouTube page. The first week we looked at Moses. The next week we looked at Joshua. Then week 3 last week we were looking at Gideon. And this week we figured, hey, David and Goliath, this is a perfect way for us to end this series, Face It, for us to wrap things up. So we said, let's add an extra week. Let's jump into the story of David and Goliath. And if you're taking notes today, the title of today's message is Under Pressure. Under Pressure. I don't know about you, but I like to think of myself as somebody who responds well when I'm under pressure. But as much as I might think I respond well under pressure, the reality of the situation is that I only respond well under pressure in certain situations. So for example, if somebody came to me and said, hey, Scott, I need somebody to give a speech. I need somebody to give a sermon. I need somebody to give a message. And you only have like 3 hours to prep. I had somebody who was going to come do this, and they bailed. I feel as if I could step up and rise to the occasion. And in that moment, under pressure, I would respond pretty well. The adrenaline rush, I would get going. I enjoy speaking. I would figure something out because it's something that I have experience in. And if you were to be honest with yourself, if you think about something you have experience in, you'd probably think, yeah, I would respond well under pressure. But when it comes to things that I have absolutely no experience in and I have no idea how to handle, I don't respond very well under pressure. So just a couple years ago, there were witnesses in this room to this occasion. I was asked to play on a softball team. I have never played softball, and I have never played baseball in my entire life. I'm not really familiar with the rules. I don't really know how to play. And I was placed in the outfield, and somehow the ball came my way. And I had the ball, and I had a glove on. I don't even know where I got this glove. Who was letting me use their glove? I don't know. And all I remember was having the ball in my hands and hearing people yell at me. And I don't know if you've been in a situation like this before. When you don't know what's going on and people are yelling at you, you just hear just a bunch of things. You can't hear clearly. And I couldn't hear clearly. And I remember seeing two different people who were not near each other at all. And I thought, should I throw to that person or that person? And I didn't make a decision as to where I should throw the ball. And I think the play was dead at this point in time too. And I made a decision mid-throw as to where I was going to throw the ball, and it went to the middle of nowhere. Like, the ball literally went to the middle of nowhere. Our camera person, Kaylin, witnessed this, and she's laughing right now. It was very embarrassing. And I was under the pressure of the moment. People were yelling, people were screaming, and I thought, I don't know what to do with this, so I just threw the ball to the middle of the field, and the team got an extra run, and it was just an absolute mess. It was an absolute mess. And I don't know about you, but you've probably been in a situation like that before where you're thinking of the pressure. Like, I have no experience in this area. I don't know what to do. And so you just don't respond well. And that was me in that moment. And then I imagine when it comes to real life, when it comes to real pressure that we're facing, whether it has to do with stress or anxiety, there are often times when we're dealing with the pressure of a moment, when we're dealing with the pressure of life. And we're thinking, I want to respond well. I want to have the proper response. But I don't know if I do have the proper response right now. I don't know how to respond in this moment. And this is what's going to be so powerful about this story of David and Goliath for us today, is that the Israelites, God's people, they were under great pressure. And they were going up against another army called the Philistines. And if you're not familiar with the story of David and Goliath, that's okay. We're going to fill you in. We're going to let you know about what that's all about. I was actually a little intimidated yesterday. I was talking to my nephew, Liam, and he knew more about the story than I did. And I was like, I've been studying for this all week. And Liam, if you're watching right now, I was very impressed with what you knew. My nephews watch a lot. So Liam, Rowan, Jack, and Silas, you're like great fans. Thank you guys for tuning in. But anyways, he knew so much about the story, and I was like, of course he does. When I was a kid, I loved the story of David and Goliath. It's a great story for a little boy because you have this shepherd boy who faces this giant, and he takes a stone and he kills the giant. Because there's this moment of pressure for the Israelites. The Israelites are on a mountain, the Philistines are on a mountain, and there's a valley in between them. And neither army they're kind of at a standstill. Neither army wants to approach the other, because if they were to pursue the other, that means they'd be going through the valley and going uphill, and inevitably they would lose. And so therefore they had went to this type of warfare where each army would send out one representative to represent their people, and whoever won the battle between the two people thus won the battle for their army that they were representing. Well, the Philistines sent out this giant by the name of Goliath, and the Israelites were like, this guy's huge. We don't have anybody to face him. We don't know what we're going to do under this immense pressure. Some people believe, and the scriptures actually say, that Goliath was close to 10 feet tall. He was huge. And then all of a sudden, this 16-year-old shepherd boy by the name of David is coming along to deliver some food to his brothers who were in the Israelite army, and he hears the taunting of Goliath, and he says, who is this giant to go against the people of God? And David boldly goes out with his slingshot. He twirls this thing around. I don't know if this looks accurate. I don't know exactly. I'm not a man of war, but he twirls this slingshot around, and he releases a stone. It hits Goliath right between the eyes. Goliath dies, and then David chops off his head. It's a pretty brutal story, to be honest with you. But this is what happens. So what did it take for David, a young 16-year-old shepherd boy, to step up in a moment of great pressure when everybody else was afraid? What did it take for him to say, I'm going to face it, I'm going to face this giant, and I'm going to pursue and have the victory that God has called us to have? So I want us to take the next few minutes unpacking this story and see, how can we, when faced with an impossible situation, or when we're in the middle of great pressure, how can we respond in a way of victory the way David did, and not respond in a way of fear like the Israelites did? Which brings us to our first question. What is your interpretation? What is your interpretation? I've been married to my wife, Kim, for a little over 5 years now. And I can tell you, oh yeah, thank you. It's been a great 5 years. And hopefully many more to come. I don't want to be bleak. Hopefully many, many more to come. And what's so funny about us is that Kim and I can be in a conversation with the exact same person or the exact same group of people, and we can leave the conversation and have a completely different interpretation of what was said in that conversation. We read body language differently. We hear words differently. Sometimes we have a different interpretation because I have an inability to pay attention and I didn't hear what was actually said in the conversation. And so we're talking about what happened in the conversation, and I'm thinking, I don't really know actually, but I'm going to pretend I did because I don't want to say that I was not listening. But sometimes we can hear the exact same thing, really, and have a different interpretation of what happened in that conversation and in that moment. And this is where we find the Israelites and David. They heard the exact same thing from Goliath, but they had a completely different interpretation of how to respond to what Goliath was saying. Look at this in 1 Samuel chapter 17 when Goliath starts to taunt the Israelites and he starts to call out, hey, bring somebody forward to fight me. Goliath says this, if he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us. Again, the Philistine said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul, who was the king of Israel at the time, and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed, and they were greatly afraid. You see, Saul and the people of Israel were looking at this situation through a filter of fear. They had a filter of fear. Goliath is huge. He's a giant. We could never possibly face him. And so because they had a filter of fear, they were just standing back. They were choosing to do nothing. They were afraid. But then David comes along to deliver some food to his brothers. And look at what 1 Samuel chapter 17 says later on. And as he was talking with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine from Gath named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke these same words. And David heard them. David heard them. So David heard the exact same thing that the Israelites were hearing, but he had a different interpretation. You see, when David heard the taunts of Goliath, he was hearing a call forward. But when the Israelites heard the taunts of Goliath, they were staying back. Sometimes we can hear the exact same thing that others are hearing, and when others hear it, they may say, or when you hear it, you may say, I'm just going to hold back. But maybe sometimes the taunting, maybe sometimes the intimidation is not a call backwards, but it's a call to move forward. And this is the interpretation that David had. He starts saying, who is this Philistine to come against God's people? Because you see, David would have been familiar with the stories that we've even looked at in the past few weeks. He would have been familiar with the story of Gideon, who was a coward, but then God called him a warrior and he led God's people forward. He would have been familiar with the story of Joshua, who led God's people into the promised land. And God said, be strong and courageous. David had been familiar with the story of Moses, who led God's people out of slavery and through the Red Sea. David knew who God was, and so therefore when David heard the taunts of the Philistine, his interpretation was not an interpretation of fear, but it was an interpretation of faith. What filter are you looking at life through? Are you looking at life through a filter of fear or through a filter of faith? The Israelites had a filter of fear. They were staying back. But David had a filter of faith. Type that in the chat. Say, I'm going to have a filter of faith. A filter of faith. Type that in. I'm going to have a filter of faith. Yes, a filter of faith. And so David had this filter of faith. Therefore, he was able to move forward. He didn't stay back. When you look at the things that are going on in the world around you, even on a macro level, when you think about the things that all of us have dealt with this year, the coronavirus, the election, now the holiday season, the hopes of 2021 that hopefully they'll be better than 2020. Are you looking at all of the things that are happening in the world through a filter of fear or through a filter of faith? Here's the thing, the two filters are very similar. They are both at times filters of what if. But a filter of fear is, what if this happens, and then going into a hysteria and paranoia. A filter of faith is saying, what if, but looking at it through the lens of optimism and opportunity. And knowing that God is in the future, and that whatever is happening is not a surprise to God. And saying that I'm going to have a filter of faith because God is always moving forward. God is always at work. And so therefore, I am going to move forward, and I'm going to trust that he is always at work. A filter of faith says, let's move forward. A filter of fear says, I'm just going to stay back. And a filter of fear allows us to be paralyzed. A filter of fear puts us in a place of paralysis where we don't move, where we don't do anything, where we choose to just stand idly by. But a filter of faith says, I don't know the outcome, but I'm still going to move forward. And because David had a filter of faith and he moved forward, he was able to press on even when people started questioning him. Because when you step into a place of a filter of faith, people will start to question, what are you doing? Why are you so optimistic? Shouldn't you just come down to my level? And that's what we get with David when we see this, is that haters are going to hate. Haters gonna hate. Haters gonna hate. And as in the words of James Franco, ain'ters gonna ain't. But we're not gonna get into that today. Haters gonna hate. Haters gonna hate. And this is what happened with David. And because David starts to move forward, David comes to deliver some food to his brothers, and he starts to ask questions. He said, who is this Philistine? Who is this guy? Why are you guys so scared of him? And David's brother gets really mad at David. Now, his brother has a number of reasons to maybe be upset with him. David does ask, what is the reward for killing this Philistine? So there may have been a little bit of mixed motives there with David of, what is the reward? I want to know what the reward is. And then also in 1 Samuel chapter 16, Samuel, who was the prophet of Israel at that time period, came to appoint the next king of Israel, and he passed by all of David's brothers, and then God used the prophet Samuel to choose David as the next king of Israel. So his brother Eliab may have been a little jealous of, hey, I want to be the king. Why did my brother get to be chosen to be king? So David's around. He's asking questions. His brother is probably a little bit jealous of him because he's going to be the next king and he's not going to be the next king. And David starts asking questions, and his brother probably starts to hate a little bit too because he starts to look at his own insecurities and think, well, I don't want to stand up to this Philistine, and my brother's going to do it. And so, I'm just going to speak from my insecurities and try to drag him down to my level. And this is what his brother says to him. It says, now Eliab in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 28 and 29. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger burned against David. And he said, why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? David, you're a shepherd. Get back to taking care of the sheep. Just get out of here. I know your insolence and wickedness of your heart, for you have come down in order to see the battle. But David said, what have I done now? Was I not just asking a question? Was it not just a question? What have I really done? And his brother just starts hating on him. And this is what is going to happen. Whenever you start to move forward with a filter of faith and say, I'm going to face it. I'm not going to stay back. I'm going to face it. I'm going to move forward. Haters will hate because you are challenging the status quo. And whenever you start to challenge the status quo, people who misunderstand you will start to speak out of a place of jealousy and cynicism and complacency. You see, we had this a little bit too when we first started a church. We had so many people who were supporting us, so many people who were in our corner. But then we did have some people who we thought were going to be in our corner and were not in our corner. And they started almost dragging us down a little bit of, you don't know what you're doing and why are you doing this? And receiving a little bit of hate. And I think, honestly, it's because we were challenging a status quo. We were saying, hey, there's some things that we want to do a little bit differently because we don't love the way that things are always done. And this is what happens when you begin to challenge the status quo. People begin to speak from a place of complacency. They begin to speak from a place of cynicism. They begin to speak from a place of jealousy. And unfortunately, a lot of times this happens with overly religious people because they're so used to the way things used to be that when you come along and try something new and say, God's calling me to do this or God's calling me to do that, they start to be, why would God speak to you in that way? But I don't want to get too harsh here, but they're really just calling you down to cynicism, complacency, and jealousy. And cynicism, complacency, and jealousy, they're like a drug. Once people start taking them in, they just want to take more and more and more, and they want to spread it. They want other people to step into that place with them. They want other people to wallow around in jealousy and complacency and cynicism with them. And it's so much easier to just speak from a place of hate and cynicism and complacency and jealousy than it is to cheer somebody else on. It actually feels better to cheer somebody on if you would actually step out and do it. But it's sometimes easier to just say, I'm going to try to drag somebody down, because where they're going to, man, that's going to mean I have to get better. That means I'm going to have to do some things differently. That means I'm going to have to be willing to follow them or challenge. Like, if they're willing to do that, why won't I do that? And as soon as you start to challenge the status quo, haters will start to hate. And don't get me wrong, Philippians chapter 2, Paul is very clear. He condemns selfish ambition. We should not do things out of selfish ambition, but he does not condemn ambition. Ambition. We have been called and created to be ambitious. God is an ambitious God, so why would he not want his creation to be ambitious? If God is ambitiously moving in the world and working to love people and use people and save people and heal people, why will we not be ambitiously moving in and through the world to join God in what he is doing? So yes, selfish ambition we want to run from, but ambition for the sake of others, ambition for the good of others, just like David was working for here, we have to be willing to step into that. And here's where I give David a lot of credit. David was willing to move forward. And I don't really think he had much of a support system, to be honest with you. His brother started hating on him. Then he goes to King Saul, the most powerful man in all of Israel. And he tells King Saul's plan. He's like, King Saul, I got to go face this giant. And King Saul, David, you don't want to do that. But David still moves forward. Even with the hate of his brother and the doubt of King Saul, David still says, no, I'm going to do this. David still went to face the giant even without any support system in place. I give him a lot of credit. Honestly, I'm not quite that bold. I'm not that strong. I need a support system in place. I need my wife, Kim. I need Neil. I need Lindsay. I need Aaron. I need Joy. I need our story team who we all got here this morning. You guys can give yourself a hand. You guys are great. I need a story team. I need my men's story group that meets every other Wednesday morning at 6 a.m. I need that support system, and you do too, which is why you should get in a story group, and you should go to newstorybuffalo.com and get in a story group. Jamar and Anita have an open group right now. There are so many other open groups. Get plugged in. Because as soon as you start to propel forward into God's purpose, you are going to need a support system around you, cheering you on and saying, go, go, go. Because when you step into the faith that God has for you, people will begin to question you. Specifically the cynics, specifically those who are speaking from a place of insecurity, specifically those who are speaking from a place of complacency. I'm not talking about people who question you because they have questions about faith. That's okay. We want to invite those things. I'm talking about the people who are questioning because they're just trying to bring you down to their level. I'm talking about the people who are standing idly by just like the Israelites were doing nothing, who are saying, David, just hold back with us. Those are the kind of people I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people who are fighting the progress that God has for you. As soon as those people start to speak into your life, it's going to be hard to move forward. But if you want to move forward, you got to have a support system in place. Get in a story group. Type that in the chat. Get in a story group. So you remind yourself, get in a story group. And if you're in a story group, you're just promoting story groups for us then. Get in a story group. And when you have that support system in place, and when you begin to move forward and face it, no matter the situation, you will understand this, that you are made for this moment. You are made for this moment. David understood that he was made for the moment. That's why he pressed forward even when his brother Eliab was hating. That's why he moved forward even when King Saul doubted him. David knew that he was made for this moment. And here's the funny thing. If anybody was physically made for this moment, it was actually King Saul. Some scholars and historians believe that King Saul could have been as close to 7 feet 5 inches tall. King Saul was taller than everybody in all of Israel. And he was the king. He was the leader. So if there's anybody that should be facing a 10-foot giant, it is your 7'5" leader who's taller than everybody in all of Israel. But instead, he was just hanging back. He was afraid. And David said, no, this little shepherd boy who was 16 years old, I'm not having it. I had been made for this moment. And he was able to look back at the past experiences of his life and the experience that he had as a shepherd to understand that God had made him for this moment. Look at what he says to King Saul. He said, but your servant, as referring to himself, was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, And this uncircumcised Philistine, what an insult there. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has turned the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul's like, whoa, hold up, roller coaster tycoon. Settle down here. He actually said, Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. And Saul said, go, may the Lord be with you. I don't have to take care of this. Go, may the Lord be with you. We'll see what happens, David. But David said, the God who delivered me from the bear and the lion, he will deliver me from this Philistine. I am made for this moment. And even if you're unfamiliar with the story of David and Goliath, you've probably heard this saying before. Man, that's a true David and Goliath story. That's a David and Goliath story. That phrase is usually used when somebody overcomes impossible circumstances. Maybe even something in like the March Madness tournament when a 15 seed upsets a number 2 seed. It's a small school, takes out the big school. Oh, that's a true David and Goliath story. It's an underdog story. Because we've viewed David as the underdog, the small shepherd boy who went up against the giant. It's a true underdog story. But as I was looking at this story this week, I don't think David ever saw himself as the underdog. I don't think David ever once saw himself as the underdog. And I think that's for 2 reasons. One on a divine level and one on a human level. On a divine level, as I said, he knew the story of God's people. He knew that God would deliver his people no matter what. And he knew that God had made him for this moment. He delivered me from a lion and a bear. Of course I can go take on this giant because I know who God is and I know that God will fight for me no matter what's up against me. So on a divine level, he didn't see himself as an underdog, but also on a human level, he did not see himself as an underdog. Yeah, I was studying for this message and I went back to listen to a TED Talk I heard a number of years ago from Malcolm Gladwell. Some of you may be familiar with some of his work. He's had some wonderful books, and he wrote a book called David and Goliath. I didn't take time to read the book. I just listened to the 15-minute TED Talk. And in the TED Talk, he talks about how in this time period, 3,000 years ago, there were 3 types of military. There were cavalry, infantry, and archers. And the cavalry were men who rode on horse and buggy. The infantry, those were men who had shields and swords and armor. And archery were men with bows and arrows, but also men with slings like David had. Archery men with slings, and they would, like I said, sling it around and release a stone. And what we've actually found from history is that these archers were incredibly accurate. They could hit moving birds. They would go hunting with these, and they would hit moving birds with their stone. They could hit targets from up to over 200 yards away. That's 2 football fields. They would release the stones at up to over 100 miles per hour, faster than most Major League Baseball pitchers can throw a baseball. This was actually an incredibly efficient way of warfare. And so David must have been really, really good with this. He had been trained with this since a young age. He knew how to twirl this thing around and release a stone to hit the giant. And not only that, the Israelites had most likely exaggerated the problem at hand. You see, in recent years, the medical community, Malcolm Gladwell revealed this as well, has asked, was there something wrong with Goliath? And in layman's terms, Goliath most likely struggled from something that we would in layman's terms call giantism. But the medical term is acromegaly. And when you have acromegaly, you actually move very slowly, and typically have vision problems, whether that be nearsightedness or double vision. And if you look at the story closely enough, it seems as if Goliath did have acromegaly, because Goliath moved very slowly, and Goliath couldn't see very well. He had to have an attendant lead him out into the field. And when he sees David, he looks at David and said, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? David didn't have any sticks. He at the most maybe had a staff with him, not sticks. He couldn't see very well. And so isn't this so funny? This is what we as humans do. We always exaggerate the problem at hand. We always exacerbate the issue and make it way worse than what it truly is. While Goliath may have been tall and physically intimidating, he actually wasn't as much of a threat as what they had made him out to be. He moved slow, he couldn't see very well, but we do this so often with the problems that we face in life. We play it out in our minds to make it this huge thing, and it's so funny that we will play out our problems and our worries and our concerns to a ridiculous extent, but we'll never exaggerate in our minds who God is. We always make God much smaller than who he is when we imagine things, and we exaggerate our problems at hand. But really, maybe what we should be doing is exaggerating who our God is and seeing that he is the God who overcame sin, death, and the grave, who gives life to all things, and exaggerating who he is and playing down our problems, because our problems, when placed in the hands of God, are truly nothing. And David knew that, and David understood that. And he knew that he was made for this moment. Whatever you are facing right now, you are made for this moment. Type that in the chat. Made for this moment. Made for this moment. And David goes to face Goliath. And with great boldness, look at what he says to him. Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin. Good for you. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you." I'm getting a little bit dark and violent here, but hey, that's how things were back then. "I'm going to remove your head from you, and I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and to the wild beasts of the earth." I'm going to feed these people to birds, man. It's crazy stuff. "That all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear. He does not deliver with the weapons of this world, but for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you, Goliath, into our hands." He will give you into our hands. So David declares, I know who God is, and he will give us the victory. And David goes charging at Goliath. He releases the stone, hits him right between the eyes, kills him, and then chops off his head. And Israel has the victory. And here's what I think is so important about this story, and I really think that this sums up the entirety of this series very, very well. This idea of face it. We're all just ordinary people. We're all just ordinary people, just like Moses, just like Joshua, just like Gideon, just like David. We're all just ordinary people made for this moment. And when you're in this moment of great stress, great anxiety, not knowing how you're going to get out, not knowing what's next, you can trust in this, that God has never stopped fighting for you, and God will never stop fighting for you. God has never stopped fighting for you, and God will never stop fighting for you. This is who he is. God does not get tired. God does not get exhausted. God does not get tired of you. God does not say, "Oh man, all your problems, I just need a nap, I'll be back later." God does not get tired or exhausted. He has not stopped fighting for you, and he will not stop fighting for you. The battle belongs to the Lord. The victory is found in him. And just as David declared, your destiny is to be delivered. That is your destiny in him. And David said, the Lord will deliver us. Your destiny is to be delivered. God has not stopped fighting for you, and God will not stop fighting for you. Put that in the chat. God will not stop fighting for me. No matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter what's going on in your life right now, God will not stop fighting for you. He's never stopped, and he won't stop. God is a can't stop, won't stop God. It's who he is. And even on an internal level, here's what we have to understand. If God never stops fighting for you, then we are not going to stop fighting. If God never stops fighting for you, then we're going to jump on board and we're not going to stop fighting. We're not going to stop fighting to know him more. We're not going to stop fighting for love. We're not going to stop fighting for peace. We're not going to stop fighting for justice. We're not going to stop fighting for hope. We're not going to stop fighting for unity and truth. God doesn't stop fighting, so as his people who want to reflect who he is, we're not going to stop fighting. We're not going to stop fighting for our relationships. We're not going to stop fighting for our families. We're not going to stop fighting for our marriages. We're not going to stop fighting if you're a parent for your kids. We are not going to stop fighting. God doesn't stop fighting, so we don't stop fighting. We're not going to stop fighting for those who are broken. We are not going to stop fighting for those who are hurt. We are not going to stop fighting for those who are lost. We're not going to stop fighting for those who are wandering. We are not going to stop fighting for those who are saying, I don't like the story that my life is telling right now. We are not going to stop fighting for those people because we know that in Christ Jesus, everybody can have a new story. And since God will not stop fighting for us, and God has never stopped fighting for us, and he never will stop fighting for us, we are always going to face it, and we are not going to stop fighting either. We will not stop. We will face it. And just as David said, our destiny is to be delivered. Victory is found in him. We will see a victory. I'm going to invite the band in right now to get ready. But I want you to know this today, that whatever you're facing right now, that it's time to flip the interpretation if you have an interpretation of fear. Or you know somebody who's going through something difficult. Or maybe this is a message you're going to come back to one day when you're going through a difficult season. The interpretation is this. We're going to have an interpretation of faith, not an interpretation of fear. When the haters hate, we're going to push past that. And we're going to lean into the support system that God has given us to propel us into our purpose. And we are going to understand that we are made for this moment, because our God does not stop fighting for us, and he will not stop fighting for us. Therefore, we will not stop fighting, and we will face it. That's what we learned from Moses, Joshua, Gideon, and David. And Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. We will face it, and we will do it together. I want to pray for you now in this moment. So if you would, wherever you're watching from, please bow your heads and join us in prayer. Jesus, I thank you that we know that you will not stop fighting for us. That, Jesus, you fought so much for us that you went to the cross to die for us. And then you conquered death for us. You never stopped fighting. And because you fought to have peace with us, we will not stop fighting to bring peace to the world around us. That when it's intimidating, when it's tough, when it's difficult, we will press on and we will move forward. That we will not break under pressure, but we will face it and push against the status quo, knowing that you are fighting for us, God. I pray for anyone watching right now who's going through something that is difficult, who's going through something that's uncertain, that you right now, God, by the power of your Spirit, would bring them a presence of comfort and peace, and let them know that you are with them, that you have not given up on them and you never will, and that you're always fighting. You never stop fighting for us, and so we are not going to stop fighting. Thank you, God, for the stories of people who went before us so that we can see who you are and what you've done for us. May we face it and move forward. In your name I pray. Amen. Hey, if you joined us today, we would love to continue to get connected with you. Go to our website, newstorybuffalo.com. Fill out the Get Connected card, or Get Connected link. No cards here. Get the Get Connected link. And we would love to get to know you. Or if you've never given your life to Jesus, that's the most important decision you'll ever make, is to step out of the old life and step into the new. Anyone is in Christ is a new creation. Jesus died so that you could have life. He paid the penalty of our sin. He came back from the grave so that we could have new life. Say, I want to follow Jesus. If you're saying that today, I want to follow Jesus, go fill out the Get Connected link. We would love to talk to you about that. Or if you need a support system, go to our website, newstorybuffalo.com. Sign up for a story group. We want to get connected with you. We want to do life with you. And we're here to pray for you and be here for you. And continue to tune in with us. We're going to be here online for the next 2 weeks. And then we're going to have a grand reopening in person on Thursday, December 24th, Christmas Eve, 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. You don't want to miss it. 4 p.m. we'll have childcare available, but we'll have 2 services available. Invite your friends, invite your family, and continue to join us online. We want to continue to stay connected with you. Let's move forward together. Let's face it. Please stay online with us as we continue to sing praises to our God as we close out the service today, and as we think about how can we all face it together.